Welcome to a history of saps, blackjacks, and slungshots. And we have a fantastic one to look at today. I've wanted one of this configuration for a long time, and I finally have one. As is so often the case with these things, this basically doesn't have a name, or if it did have one, it's lost to history. If anybody knows different, let me know. So I'm calling it the wire-bound Cosh because of its most noticeable feature. Definitely gives it as distinctive a calling card as any of our weapons, and the striking head also is pretty unique. Now, this overall shape you will see without wire, but every time I've seen the wire, it's been on this shape, if you got that. So I think of this as kind of an English Cosh type shape. I've seen it come up in auctions over there, but probably just more European in general. But now let's talk kind of historical precedent. Here is the bamboo Cosh, if you recall. Also, England, Europe, old world kind of a thing. You didn't really see these in America, and they might not look very similar at all. But there's a couple of important similarities. Kind of the exotic take on a typical Cosh. So you could walk around with a loaded wooden club in old England, and a lot of people did. It was a common weapon, but it's just much cooler to have one that's loaded bamboo, right? It's got that exotic flair. You've got a colonial, imperial type culture, and you import things from far away. So, as far as I can tell, this type here would have been produced in Asia and then sent over for export to the UK. It also, if you saw right there, had the leather kind of really restricted to a short surface. And both of those, I think, are similarities that we can pull in. Now here, the fruit kosh, again, definitely doesn't look much like ours at all, but similar time and place, at least from what I'm going to go with. And this one here would use exotic wood. Remember, that was highly prized. This is the fruit kosh, so you're using wood from like the Caribbean, again, very exotic from very far away, but using it in a very familiar homebound weapon. This one here would not have been created overseas and then brought back home or exported back to like a European audience, I don't think. It's just that the wood would have been sourced from there. But I'm pretty sure the bamboo kosh was the opposite. And then here's one of my favorites. Actually, all of these are some of my favorites. But and this one doesn't share a exotic flair like all three of the previous ones. I'm just going to go ahead and include this one as what I'm going to consider kind of similar time and place milieu. So the person who held one of these might very well be someone who would hold one of the other ones that we just reviewed. All of that is, quite imprecise when it comes to our subject because these weapons were just not chronicled very much at all. But let's get an idea of how these work together. And you notice there's kind of a commonality almost in look. I mean, they're certainly different from like 20th century saps and blackjacks, right? There's a lot more wood for one thing, right? It's not just leather on the exterior at all. And even the striking surfaces on the first and the last that we're looking at here, the ones that actually have, leather or stitching or some kind of cushioning, you can see how it's very restricted. Same thing with our wire-bound Cosh. If you think about it, look at that striking head. It's kind of mushroomed out so much that you really have almost an edge to strike with, which is what I thought was similar here on the ends of the bamboo Cosh. So I haven't gotten to the wire wrapping yet. The reason I think that calls to mind a foreign influence, and therefore call to mind those other ones, is that when I first saw the wire on this type in general, not just this one, I thought Africa, traditional African weaponry, and I thought, well, maybe this was an English thing, kind of inspired by what they saw out, right, in the imperial, ventures, and said, okay, we've got the leather Kosh, which we love, what if we add wire to it? But first, let's get back to the weapon itself. So there it is, very, very thin shaft. There's that, right, distinctive whippiness, springiness. Although it's so thin, it's definitely not a spring, of course. And it's got that long lanyard. Even the lanyard is ornate on this one. The whole thing's got a great, great look. It's really long, and you can grab it in just a conventional way. It's also long enough to do kind of the wraparound that we've talked about with other weapons, but I have no idea if that was popular with the people who held this or things like it. And now let's kind of look end to end here. So there's the join, but look how thin that is at the bottom. You're not going to do a hammer fist with this weapon. Not at all. Look how incredibly thin. And as you saw when I was swinging it, the real surprise here is that all the flexibility is right here in the part I'm holding. Most of the shaft is actually rigid, which really, really surprised me. And just love the detail on the wire. Somebody took some time, right? Look, layering that in just over and over again, or layering it kind of side by side, I should say. And then the springs are a great touch, and kind of ironic since blackjacks would, of course, end up with springs inside the shaft. Look how cool that is. This one's in such great shape that it just might be a later version or a throwback. I just really no telling, you know. And then the striking head again, very distinctive. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, you will see this overall shape and design with that kind of that, I don't know, flower petal striking head without the wire. And again, it's just beautiful. Look at that. I think it's really great. A total success by whoever came up with the design visually. Now, obviously, you're going to kind of grip there, right? And just really, it's a swinging weapon and nothing but. Look again, look how thin that is. I'm not going to jab with it. It might bend and not be able to bend back. It might break whatever's in here. So, like I mentioned, see, it's rigid there, and all the flexibility comes to the tail. Very strange. I did not expect that in the least. Nor do I know if all of these always got about having flexibility in the same way. Don't know. Other things to point out about this is that it's bigger than it looks. When I had it on screen with all the other weapons, it was at the back of the table. So for a sap, it's pretty decent length, actually, but it's going to be easy to carry because it's got such an incredibly slim profile. As we know, braided leather, I don't even know if that's the appropriate term for the work up here on the head, but, you know, leather that's not smooth is going to cut when struck on, like, exposed skin, especially on the head, so that probably would have been a side result of using this guy. And last surprise when it comes to the striking is this one's a lot softer than it looks. It's not a soft sap, but I kind of almost treat it as one. I had that in a previous video recently because the way it squishes the leather out, a very technical term, right? But the way it squishes it out to the sides means it actually kind of has to condense, and you get a fair amount of cushioning before the impetus of the load, you know, actually hits. I'll give you the best look I can here up close. Again, to me, I kind of think of it as like a flower petal. And, you know, obviously, like I've mentioned many times, these things fascinate me. Such a strange way to go about having a bludgeon, essentially. Like, it's ornate work. It's really great to look at. You almost wouldn't want to beat it up, but there it is. Going back to the history real briefly, luckily someone I know online who's very knowledgeable about these says that similar versions came out of North Africa. So then I said, ding ding, right? And all the way into like the 60s and the 70s. So at some point this wire-bound Cosh caught on, and it lasted surprisingly long. So there you can see it in action, and that's how I would grab it. And a full-on grip like that you could do, but it feels more right with the kind of the thumb and the forefinger guiding. And this is a real, you know, tapping type weapon to me. If you swung just full power baseball bat, it wouldn't feel good. But it feels more like it's a kind of a tap, tap, tap. And no, I would not grab it like this, right? Just to show that I wouldn't. I don't think it has any utility that way at all. Those springs there, I mean, in theory, they give you extra grip. They actually do, but I'm sure it's just aesthetics that have them on there. And that is the wire-bound Cosh. A lot of conjecture there, but it's the best we could do with what we have. I'm very happy to get an example of this type in my collection. Thanks.